I'm joined in our studio by Dr. Thapelo Tselapedi. He's, of course, a political analyst to break down things for us. So thank you so much, Doc, for joining us.
Thank you.
What's your feeling around those big parties that have lost ground in this year's election relative to the last election? Do you think that some of their leaders may actually have to be spoken to or removed? Because obviously there's going to have to be an introspection around where the party went wrong, why it fell short, and it could be a number of reasons, but leadership could be one of them.
Look, I think, not all parties will have to introspect you. If you're looking at the DA, I think there's a lot of patting on the back for them, or them, patting themselves. I think on the part of your, of course, rising Zanzi, but the major ones, ANC and the EFF. ANC obviously came out of an elective conference, so that's done. There's now discussions, at least outside of the ANC that we know, discussions around potentially an NGC. That how then do they look at the positioning of their leadership. But similarly, we have the EFF that's heading towards their own elective conference, I think in December. So they need to have a discussion principally about how they position their image in the public, and how they package their communication around policies. There needs to be a lot more nuanced take, and that may require different leadership. But just bear in mind that, at least in the context of the ANC, it may be an issue that already, given the configurations of factions inside the ANC, they may have already been people who are against the current leadership, and that may use this opportunity, obviously, to take him out, have a different leadership. Remember, that's also then tied to the issue around coalitions. Who do you partner up with, whether the DA, EFF or MK? So depending on the outcomes of those sort of discussions, if they do, and I think if they're genuine about a renewing of the party, then certainly they're going to have to look at those leadership and then look at coalition politics.
Sticking with the EFF, where do you think they went wrong? Because they did very well in 2019, they picked up quite substantially, but then now it looks like they're ticking down and they're going to be the fourth largest party after MK rather than the third.
Look, I think the EFF historically has been doing well, at least in the last sort of elections, and they're one of the few political parties that are offshoots of the ANC that have been able to sustain themselves. So financially, coherent leadership as well, so and organizationally to have a footprint among the provinces of the country. I think that's been quite important. But obviously the disruption here has been on the part of MK, and I think that's been obviously a major problem there. But let me just say two things, one of which we discussed earlier on is around some of the practical objectives of their own policy proposals that they put forward. Is that pragmatic given our own budget or state coffers? But I think the other issue is around issues of migration and how do they deal with potentially, whether you want to look at immigration policy, if you want to look at it under the rubric of xenophobia. But I think the packaging there has not been well. There have been other leaders of the EFF that have better articulated that position. I think some of the sort of nonchalant engagement with which you saw the president or CIC engaging with ordinary citizens has shown, in a sense, disregard for voters. You can't say you don't care about Limpopo, you don't care about Gauteng, and that you're an internationalist. I think one obviously has to be grounded, and I think there's been that lag. If I may say just one more point, what's important about the EFF in my view is that they've managed to join the issue around identity politics, in other words, anti-racist position, and together with a class position about working class or being pro-working class. So I think it would be sad if they don't deal with the issues around renewal and leadership and packaging their policies right, because I do think this is a temporary setback. I don't think this is a permanent setback, but it depends how they reflect on this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. What about smaller parties? How do you see them faring at the moment? And ultimately, what sort of impact do they have, in the legislature, in Parliament? Because they're such small, they're such a small number. Can they really make an impact when it comes to things like policy, etc.?
No, I don't think so. Look, other political parties have effectively slipped off. not just only at the national level with the National Assembly, but also at the legislatures. Whether you are looking at COPE as well, that's looking is going to slope. Whether you are looking at IFB, not necessarily slipping off, but you get a real sense that they've really been displaced by IFP and to a certain extent your DA and the other major parties.
Yeah.
Look, I think given our democracy, you're only going to get into the legislative process as a small player. There's going to be one or two of you. And I think to that extent, it's very difficult to effect policy.
Yeah.
In any case, you're not in the executive, so you're not able to jump from parliament to be elected into to the executive. So the extent in which you can represent your constituency or the broader interests of South Africans is so that you represent their voices and opinions in parliament. That's really about it. But the real power would be those who then get into executive power and be able to effect policies. This is not to say that the legislative process is not important. It is. If you look at the issue of Phala, I think there's been a collapse. There's been a collapse of accountability measure on the part of Parliament to hold the executive to account.
Yes.
So I think it's still important to ensure that all arms of the state, including media and everybody else, is able to adhere to Chapter 2 of our Bill of Rights.
And with more parties in Parliament, presumably that accountability could be better.
Yes, certainly. But remember, it's all about voting. How many numbers have you got? Whether in this parliamentary committee, whether in the voting at the National Assembly, it all comes down to numbers. So are they able to cohere with other smaller parties, making sure that they get into pacts with the sort of medium parties to get that groundswell for proper numbers for them to be able to effect that accountability that I'm talking about. So that's we'll have to see after the constitution of these elections and then parliament.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, Dr. Thapelo Tsalapedi, joining me in studio now.
On the SABC, we've been bringing you some live digital analysis as well, really representing what that data looks like in terms of a graphic user interface. And you can see what is being reflected through the trends in the data at this hour with the data available as we await more announcements and updates from the IC. On your screen, we've got the top three, those contenders. Just after that 52% voting district tallying, you can see President Cyril Ramaphosa from the ANC leading at 42%. That roughly translates to about just over 3 million votes. Coming in second at this hour, as we continue to monitor those developments, John Steenhuisen is sitting at 1.67%. That translates to about 23% of the vote. These, of course, are just projections, and this is based on that CSIR model that we have been using. Give or take some of the margins, the margins are about 2%. And then obviously Zuma, they representing MK Party, sitting at 772,109. That, as it stands, predicted to garner them about 11% of the vote. So that's your top three. That's the situation happening nationally at this point. We're now going to also be honing in on what's happening provincially. Those data results have also emerged. In fact, the provincial seats can also be,